Hey y'all, and welcome back to the Just As I Am podcast. It is your host, Nicole, per usual, and today we are continuing our discussion on the 12 disciples with part 2, the second 6. So stick around. Welcome back! And if you're new here or you just missed out, we are discussing the 12 disciples. Now, we've already talked about the first 6 on the previous episode, and now we are going to talk about the other 6, so the second 6, if you will. So picking up where we left off, disciple number 7 is Matthew. Now, Matthew was also known as Levi, or Levi the son of Alph. Now look, I want to tell you, I actually did research, and I tried to look back over everything and figure out the pronunciation, and I want to go with this is Alphaeus. But don't quote me. Don't. Let me know if I'm wrong, but do it gently, okay? So don't ask me how we got there, because I sure don't know where Levi, the son of Alphaeus, came from. But Matthew was from Capernaum and was a, you guessed it, tax collector. Yeah, tricked you. So, bet you thought I was going to say fisherman, but no, Matthew was in fact a tax collector. James was possibly Matthew's brother, but we're not 100% sure on that. Matthew actually comes from Hebrew, meaning gift of God. That is precious. Matthew was penitent, meaning he takes his actions into consideration. He was also very hospitable. So during work hours, Jesus actually called Matthew to follow him, and that was just that. That was that. Nothing, he dropped everything and did what he was told. Very obedient, also, we can add. At one point, Matthew even invited Jesus to dine with his corrupt friends. Haven't you ever had, let's say, this group of people, so we'll say Group A. Group A is a group that has their own free will and doesn't use that free will to do the most fantastic of things. And then you have Group B, which consists of a person or people who you would say never do any wrong. They probably only not even 6%, let's say 5% of anything they're just a good person, okay? And you bring Group B to hang around Group A in hopes that Group B rubs off on Group A and maybe they'll change their ways. This is what I'm seeing in this instance, okay? So, you can find all of this in the book of Matthew, which was written by Matthew. So, first-hand information here, people. Some stories suggest that he was a missionary in Persia, Macedonia, Syria, Partha. I want to say Media, but it's probably Media or Media. You never know. And Ethiopia, even bringing good news to the king of Ethiopia. How amazing. So like many others, Matthew is assumed to have died as a martyr. Lucky number 8 is Thomas. A fun fact about Thomas is that he was a twin. Twins run in my family, so this is just something cool. He was also known as, this is also one I did not look up, Didymus, which means twin. So he was basically called another word for twin. Anyways, he was also known as Judas Thomas and Doubting Thomas. Something else we may know about him is that he was possibly a carpenter, which we know was predominant, perhaps, occupation back then. So he had that in common with Jesus, if that was true. Thomas was inquisitive, doubtful, hence his name, courageous, and faithful. He was courageous because he encouraged the disciples to go to Bethany, inquisitive because he asked Jesus where he was going, doubtful because he had to touch Jesus' scars to know that he was actually alive, and he was faithful because he affirmed that Jesus was Lord. Thomas was also one of the lucky ones to eat breakfast with Jesus after the resurrection. He was thought to have been a missionary in India and possibly killed by a spear and buried there. For number 9, we land on James. Now, James was the son of, we're going to say, Alphaeus, and possibly Matthew's brother. No guarantee, but we feel very strongly that they could have been brothers. Sometimes this James gets mixed up with Jesus' brother, James. I can see that. That makes sense. This James was known as James, the son of Alphaeus, James the Younger, and James the Less. Now, out of all of those, James the Less is not one that I would prefer to be called, but sometimes we get called things that we don't like. We don't really know any good qualities that James had, but what we do know about James is that he was, in fact, a disciple, one of 12. He was a disciple that went out, preached, cleansed, and healed. You could say that for James, you could say that James's motto when teaching, or just, I don't know, his mission statement, I guess, was that, let me look it up, I wrote it down. You can still accomplish the work of God and not have to be in the limelight. How many people do you personally know, or not even personally, because we have so many fellow Christian people that, write books and have, I don't know, gatherings. They have whatever you want to call them. They preach on Sunday morning. I'm not saying that all of those things are bad. I'm just saying that's just an example. But, I mean, it's not necessarily that they want to be in the limelight, but they want to share like James did. But then, you have some people who feel like whatever they're doing isn't worth it if people aren't seeing it or know that they're the ones who are saying it, sharing it, teaching it, whatever. I feel like that I really love this statement. You can still accomplish the work of God and not have to be in the limelight. I find that beautiful. And sometimes I feel like we have to remember that personally. Like, not everything you do has to be bright as the sun. You know what I mean? It doesn't have to be noticed by all. If it gets noticed by the right person, perhaps at the right time, like, that's enough. So, back to James. It is possible that James was a part of the revolutionary zealots. There are 2 possibilities on how James died, okay? Number 1, he was either crucified in Sinai or Persia. And number 2, he was stoned to death in Jerusalem. Neither of those sound nice, but we're not sure which one, but both of those are possibilities. With 3 disciples left, number 10 is Thaddeus. Now, Thaddeus was the son of James. He was also known as Jude, Judas, the son of James, and Lebbaeus. I don't know. You can look it up. The name Thaddeus is Aramaic, meaning beloved or dear to the heart. Love it. Judas, not to be confused with Judas Iscariot, derives from the Hebrew name Judah, meaning praise. Like I mentioned earlier, sometimes Thaddeus or Judas would get mixed up with Judas, which was also one of the names of one of Jesus's brothers. He would also get mixed up with Judas Barsabbas and Judas Iscariot. Thaddeus was inquisitive and confused. Maybe those are, I feel like those things play in hand. Like you want to know, and then you get the information, and then your brain just can't compute it. I don't know if that's his situation, but sometimes I feel like that is mine. He also went out and preached, cleansed, and healed. Thaddeus was a little bold, and he also asked Jesus to only reveal himself to his followers and not to the whole world. Jesus, of course, had a reply to this, and Thaddeus most likely changed his ways. So, both Thaddeus and James were present at the Last Supper. Another thing is that he was also possibly a zealot. Now, one thing I forgot to mention about James was that he was also there when Jesus appeared after the resurrection. I missed that when writing my notes, but I wanted to make sure I put that in there. So back to Thaddeus. No one really knows how Thaddeus died. Hopefully he did not have a gruesome, terribly awful death. So moving on to number 11, we have Simon, which I just think that's a cute name. We know for a fact that Simon was a zealot. Now the others we think were possibly zealots, but Simon for a fact was a zealot. And he was a Canaan. Okay, he was from Canaan. He was a Canaanian. Try saying that 5 times fast. Simon comes from the Hebrew name Shimon, which is Shimon, meaning hearing. Canaanian is Aramaic, meaning zealous one. He was patriotic. That is the first fact that we know about him. He was patriotic. You just gotta love it. He was also loyal and passionate and sacrificial. Like the others, he was sent out to preach to the Jews. Simon, while doing this mission work, preached, cleansed, and healed, much like some of the others. He was present for both the Last Supper and the Great Commission, which was when Jesus ascended. There are many suggestions about Simon, such as he was a bridegroom at a wedding in Cana and was a missionary in Persia. And that's where our knowledge about Simon ends. Now, we have saved probably the most notorious disciple for last. Number 12 is, in fact, the one and only Judas. And that now that I think about it, that phrase doesn't, I can't say that because we literally just talked about how Thaddeus was Judas. But okay, moving on. So, Judas was known as Judas Iscariot, Judas the betrayer, and Judas the son of Simon. Looking at Judas's resume, he would probably not get hired anywhere or have many people wanting to be his friend. That's how I feel about him. That's my view. They all had flaws, but Judas was definitely a rough one. He was greedy, deceitful, treacherous, and remorseful. None of those bring a smile to one's face. Judas was actually the treasurer for the disciples. What? Come again? He was not a very good one at that, I would assume. He actually stole from them occasionally. Sweet Jesus even referred to Judas as the devil. How endearing. Especially coming from sweet Jesus himself. That meant something, absolutely. So why does that make me laugh? I mean, it says it in the Bible. You can go look it up. I should have written down where it says that, but can you just imagine? Like, I don't know if it was said with love. Because you can't read emotion. And so reading that I mean, Jesus just, you know how you just have people with no filters, or they just say things plain as day, like there's no sugarcoating it or s- saying it lightly. But Jesus literally just telling, I believe it goes something like Jesus was talking to the disciples and he said something about, there's 11 of you here and one of you is the devil. I just, wow. And it was clear who he was talking about. At least to me, it was. So, I mean, the Bible does say that, I believe also. I mean, just go read it for yourself. If you need a smile, just go read it yourself. He even sassed Sweet Mary for anointing Jesus with expensive perfume. Good grief. Let Mary do what she wants, especially if it's for Jesus. My goodness, he deserves it. So Judas talked with Jesus at the Last Supper. I mean, they had a full-on conversation. And that is when Satan, quote, well, let's say this, quote, Satan entered his heart, unquote. After that moment, he went and sold Jesus out for 30 pieces of silver. So remember when I said he was a remorseful person? Yeah, well, after he sold out Jesus, kissed him on the cheek and everything, he rued the day. Completely regretted it. And not because Jesus's reaction, Jesus didn't react in any way. He did what he was told, right? But because he knew he messed up. Judas was remorseful because he knew what he had done was in fact wrong. That's why he regretted it. So my goodness, Judas took the blood money, the 30 pieces of silver that he got for selling out Jesus, and he threw it back into the temple. And when we say blood money, I don't mean it's bloody money like there's legit blood on it, but what it was given for or earned for. Yeah. So he took that, he rued the day, he threw that money back into the temple from the people that gave it, threw the money back in the temple to the people who gave it to him. There we go. I don't know why I'm so tongue-tied today. After he threw the money back, he went and he hanged himself. That's it. That's just what he did. What a brave thing to do. Don't go fight against what you caused, but just go hang yourself. So some scholars believe that he may have been in a sector of the Zealots called, now I looked up how this is said, but I don't remember, which is terribly sad. Sicarii, who were dagger-bearing assassins. Are we surprised if this was actually true? I don't think so. Me personally, I don't think so. Goodness. So after all of that, Judas was replaced by Matthias. Okay? Say it with me. Matthias. Matthias is now the new number 12 because there is no longer a number 12 because he hanged himself. It's not pretty, but it's true. So that is the conclusion of the second half and all 12 of the disciples. And these 12 people were imperfect men that Jesus personally chose to help him grow his kingdom. Jesus knew all about these men. He knew all of their character traits, all of their personalities, their likes, their dislikes, how many freckles they had, how many hairs on their head. He knew everything about them. And he still chose these men anyways. And we have our flaws and our imperfections as well. But, we're still perfect. We are fearfully and wonderfully made, right? Am I right? We still have the capability, no matter our flaws, to grow the kingdom just like these 12 men did. If you want to learn more about the disciples, you can go to your own Bible, I hope you get it out. on a regular basis. You can go to your own Bible and read about James, Jesus' brother, the James we mentioned earlier, Joanna, Lazarus, Salome, or Susanna. There are also many more disciples other than these people that I just named. But we have the 12 main guys who were personally chosen by Jesus, who went out and lived their lives to the fullest. They were imperfect men, but when Jesus said, "Follow me," they did. They dropped everything and followed him. And, back then, I know they had less than what we have now, but, it still had to have been hard for them to drop everything and obey like that and just follow and do what they did. And not only to do it with Jesus, but to go after Jesus and continue to do that work. To go to places like Persia and India and all of those other places that they went. And some of that led to them dying, but they did so much. I mean, they started, I want to say they started churches, but they continued the church. They grew the church. And I just want to commend them for that. I have loved learning about these men and their quirks and their strengths and weaknesses and just little tidbits about them. I love learning about people and their tidbits. That sounded kind of weird. I love learning about people, who they are on the inside versus, the outside. I mean, I'll look at you, but what am I going to gather from just looking at you? So I want to commend all of these men for what they did and helping Jesus grow the church and helping us be able to be where we are today. And I want to thank you once again for joining me on this journey. Thank you for listening to part 2. If you have not listened to part 1, just go on ahead and listen to it, because you only learned about 6 disciples today. So you got to learn about the rest, right? You need to know about all 12. Next week, we will be talking about the armor of God. So I hope that you join me again next week. Okay, love you, bye.